All right, well, official welcome to everybody to this Better Together session with the Maple League Teaching and Learning Committee. I'm really excited to be hosting today. My name's Mary Sweetman, and I'm at Acadia University in the Department of Community Development, which means that I get to be, or I am, a colleague of Chaiti Seth, who's our presenter today. So very honored to be the host and get to introduce Chaiti. This is I'm really excited for this talk, which Chaiti is called Thought, Felt, Embodied Practices for Transformative Equity Education. Chaiti is a mother of two beautiful children that I get to see once in a while in the office, a farmer, researcher, and experiential educator from India, currently living in Mi'kma'ki. She's a faculty member with the Department of Community Development, as I have said, where she learns, writes, and teaches about sustainable food systems and the inner work and community practice of healing for equity and social change. So I will turn it over to Chaiti, and I welcome all of you. And yeah, thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for that welcome, Mary. Yeah, it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Here in Mi'kma'ki as the seasons are transitioning. And so just in the context of this talk, but really in the context of all work that feels just really important to note, to remind ourselves constantly of where we are and what our responsibilities, but also the privileges that we have from getting to learn and live and play on this land, which I definitely feel, even as an immigrant. And maybe just, yeah, as Mary was saying, we're probably, we're all in different places since we're gathering virtually. And maybe I'll just invite you to if we want to just kind of take one big deep breath in together and let it out and kind of land in this shared space that we're in virtually, which allows us, even being in all our different worlds and different places, to be together for the next hour. So you just want to join me in taking kind of a breath in, or whatever feels good for you. And if you want to, letting it out with an audible sigh and just kind of landing in this space. So yeah, thanks again for being here. Thank you for having me. My name is Chaiti Seth. I use she, her pronouns. And as Mary said, I'm a parent, I'm a farmer, I'm a researcher, I'm an experiential educator, and I teach currently with the Department of Community Development at Acadia. And I'm from India. And if you ask me where in India I'm from, I'll ask you how long you have for the answer, because it's complicated. So I actually have ancestors from both sides of the border that the British left behind when they finally left India in 1947. I've had really the privilege of living in various different parts of the subcontinent. So I'm going to take a moment and throw some slides up here for the next little while. But I'll take them off too, so we can kind of be in conversation together. Can everyone see that okay? Or can someone let me know if that came up? Okay, great. All right, so here we are. Yeah. Yeah, as I said, I've lived in various different parts of the subcontinent, including the high Himalaya, which you see there, the central plains of India, as well as several different communities in different parts of southern India. I speak 4 different Indian languages, and because of that, I can understand a few others. And I mention all of this because I've really had the immense privilege of living in and learning from grassroots community organizations, doing equity work in a wide range of fields, so including health, education, tribal land rights, environmental stewardship and conservation, energy, development, and more in some urban but primarily rural areas across India, and more recently here in Mi'kma'ki. So for the last 10 years, I've been here in Mi'kma'ki. And I also wanted, as I was thinking about this talk, to just give a bit of a context to say that, I've really been oriented towards equity and social justice issues from a very young age. So my first clear memory of noticing an equity issue was maybe around the age of like 4, 5, 6. And I have this memory of my grandmother, who was a very sweet, loving, kind woman, and loved all of her grandchildren. And I watched her respond really differently to me than she did to my brother in a particular situation where essentially she was wanting me to clean up a mess that my brother had made. And the unspoken subscript in that moment was, because you're a girl, cleaning up messes is your job. And even though I didn't learn the term patriarchy for many, many more years, I remember in that moment as a young child, knowing in my bones that something about this interaction wasn't okay. And so I've been oriented, and I've had questions about power dynamics going back as far as I can remember. I organized my first protest march when I was 8 years old. I organized my first fundraising campaign to raise money for folks who were affected by the Kargil War when I was 12. And I'm not sure where this fire comes from, why this is something that burns in me, but it's been there from a very young age. And it's meant that I chose to do my undergraduate degree by correspondence. And over the course of those 4 or 5 years, I really made space for me to live in, to learn from, and to work in communities that were doing equity work and are doing incredible transformative equity work on the ground. So just to kind of lay out that context of where some of my learning and what I'm bringing today is rooted in. Now, in community development, we have something that we use often. It's called praxis. And it's essentially an approach where theory is tested in practice, and the insights, the wisdoms, and the observations of what's happening in community inform and shape theory. And it's a cyclical process. It's also a commitment to engage with data on the ground, to look and listen to as wide a range of lived experiences as we can, and to deeply consider whether our theoretical models and our conceptual frameworks are aligning with this lived experience. And when they don't, to grow and evolve and to adapt the conceptual models to make room for this data on the ground, right? And this is something I love. I love being in this dance between the ongoing cycle of like learning that's rooted in reality. And I find for me, it's where academics and community meet and enrich each other. And it's oriented towards a time and a place where really this isn't as big a gap anymore, right? Between academics and community, that we can like really narrow that gap until that's kind of happening in unison, in synchronicity. And I speak about praxis at this point because to me, it's at the heart of equity work. That transformative equity work really considers the lived experiences of the full range of community members, which for me includes both the human and the more than human, right? So all the different positionalities, identities, experiences that we have, is our theory accounting for these? Does it have a cohesive understanding and an explanation for the diverse realities that people are actually experiencing? And so when we talk to people and we hear that in community they're having these very different lived experiences within the same circumstances, are our conceptual models and our practice really reflecting that? And if it doesn't, then how does it need to grow to encompass that, to embrace that, right? So these are some of the questions that I carry. And one of the questions that I come back to over and over in equity work is that in spite of knowing what the issues are and what changes are needed, we've known this for a very long time, right? Many incredible people for centuries have been like articulating what the issues are and where we need to go. And yet as a society, as a collective, our progress on equity issues is fairly slow, right? Many, many things have changed. We've come a long ways, and many, many things haven't changed for the better. So whether we look at mental and physical health outcomes, land and water access, poverty, housing issues, income level or income stability, physical safety, in all of these areas, and I won't read out all of these, but I just put them up there, as kind of a broad scan of where are we at, right? And that these things are still true in these very deep and very widespread ways, that in all of these areas, outcomes are worse for marginalized peoples, for racialized peoples, for indigenous peoples, for trans folks, for queer folks, for people living with disabilities, for neurodivergent folks, and our more than human neighbors. And this is really a question that I'm holding, is that why is it that in spite of knowing about, and for so many people working so hard and having worked so hard at transforming social conditions for centuries, we're still in this place, right? Why are these patterns, why do these patterns keep showing up? Where are we at and what can we learn from that? And so this question has really led me to some interesting places, following in the footsteps of many and walking alongside many others. And one of these places where I am now, and that's why for me this talk is both really exciting and it's also just acknowledging that it's really my learning edge, right? Like I'm really sharing. So thank you for that opportunity to be able to share something where I'm really in my learning and my growth. But one of those places is recognizing the need for transformative equity education to consider the intellect, emotions, and the body in our justice work, which is why the title of this talk, Thought, Felt, and Embodied. Yeah, and I'll just give you a quick overview before we dive into what I'm imagining our time together will look like. So obviously I've taken a little bit of time to introduce myself and introduce the talk. I'll lay out a few kind of conceptual frameworks and foundational principles that I'm working for that feel important to name to set the stage. We'll ground those conversations in practice. So we'll use an example of some classroom agreements that I use when I'm learning and teaching about equity. And these are essentially guidelines for how we show up in these conversations, right? They help create a container within which we can hold and have these conversations and do equity work. And we'll go through why these particular agreements, and then we'll break into small groups and do a short practice together if you're all willing to be in that with me and to experiment with me. And we'll come back into the larger group, we'll reflect a little bit on that practice, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions. Does that feel okay? Does that feel good in terms of a flow for our time? Okay. Great. So a lot of equity work still focuses primarily, especially in the institutional context, I encounter that a lot of the equity work that we're doing still focuses primarily on our thought responses, right? How do we think about equity? From my experiences in a classroom, though, I have yet to encounter a student or faculty member or anyone else in the university communities who'll say people are not equal, right? We should discriminate against people, or we should treat this group of people less than, right? You don't come across this, so you don't hear this. Most everyone has been taught the idea that all people are equal, right? And yet our actions don't mirror this idea. Every day in our classrooms, in our homes, in all community spaces, we embody inequitable power dynamics based on race, on class, on caste, on gender, on cognitive style, on body size, on culture, religion, sexual orientation, species, ability, and much more. Even with the best of intentions, we participate in and we continue to reproduce systems of inequity and oppression. And this shows up in our conversations, in our interpersonal interactions, in how work is divided. In the context of teaching, it's like who's even in our classrooms, right? Who feels safe there? Who's bracing or masking or hiding parts of themselves in order to be able to be there? And so a lot of my work has been staying in this crack and kind of understanding this gap between our thoughts and our actions, and the space between our ideas about equity and our lived embodied experiences of a blend of equity and inequity, right? And so the insights, wisdom, and conceptual frameworks that I'm talking about and working with and building on, I've been taught by many mentors and leaders of grassroots movements and communities, as well as from the work of scholars both in the global north and the global south. And that's what's really leading me deeper into this work. And I put some of their names up here on a slide because I'd like to acknowledge and honor my lineage in this work. These are some of my key teachers and mentors whose ideas and practices have shaped my thinking and my being, the epistemology and pedagogy of my work. And this is whose work I'm building on, of course, in collaboration with many others. So before we go any further, I'm going to pause the slide, but I'd love to hear a little bit more from everyone who's in the room here with us. Yeah, I don't know if folks are comfortable throwing their cameras on for a minute, or if you just want to use kind of one of those hand signals or whatever that is just to indicate. But I'm just curious about amongst the folks who are here, just a quick show of hands, how many of you are doing equity work in your classrooms, either as a direct course or a topic, or maybe using an equity lens to teach and learn, just to get a quick, like a rough sense of, yeah. Yeah, all right, I see a bunch of hands. For some, it's a maybe, and that's totally fine too. And so if you can kind of recall these experiences and these moments when you're doing this work and you're thinking about this, right? I'd like to think about what responses you typically see when you initiate or hold equity-related conversations, right? So I'm thinking about what shows up when you're having these conversations, whether it's in the classroom, in departmental meetings, at home, with family, with friends, out in community spaces. What are the kinds of responses that are showing up? And we're going to break it down. So going back to that title of the talk of like thought, embodied, felt, we're going to break it down. So my first question, and I'll try and type this into the chat as well, is that I'd like you to consider is what emotional responses do you encounter in yourself? So what shows up for you internally and also in others when you have these conversations, right? What emotions, what feelings are showing up? And I'll type that into the chat and feel free to put your responses in there. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Mary. Got it. And I also did just ask maybe David or Mary or Juan Carlos, someone might just speak these answers into the chat. So for those of us who it's a lot to like handle both media, we can just hear them too.
fear, anxiety, confusion, confusion and fear. In others, I sense defensiveness, and in myself, I feel anxious, sometimes frustration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for naming all of those. The next question I want us to consider, yeah, and I see some more hesitation, defensiveness, bracing.
Brave, yeah.
So my next question is really, what intellectual responses do you encounter? What kind of things do people say when these conversations are happening, right? When they're brought up? Do you notice any patterns of the kinds of things that people say, the intellectual responses that they have, we have, when we're trying to have these conversations?
Oh, we're all equal, but yes, but.
Lots of buts.
Mhm. Many times receptive. They usually have specific incidences they would like to talk through.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, things that are sitting with people that are like sticking with people, right? That are like, oh, I want to try and dive in deeper and I'm looking for a space.
Um, Sarah wrote gratitude for bringing it up. People sometimes say they had no idea of X, Y, and Z. A lot of qualifying statements.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. And the last question I'll ask is, what body responses you've noticed, if you've noticed any, and again, in yourself or in other people. And sometimes this might show up as like, what kinds of movements are people making, right? What are people's bodies doing? Are they relaxed? Do they seem tight? Are they fidgety? Are they still, lethargic, alert, agitated, right? What kinds of things do you notice in terms of how people are holding their bodies as we're having these conversations, and ourselves? So always a question for both. Thanks,
I
Mary.
see avoiding eye contact, no eye contact, lots of shifting, sliding back a bit, quiet, leaning back, crossing arms, staring off into space, looking downward, demoralized. My body speeds up, pretend to be listening to, because I can tell they're better. There better be somewhere else. They would better be somewhere else. Rolling eyes, looking away,
Mm-hmm.
fidgeting in myself.
Yeah.
Some excitement though.
Yeah. 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 The full range, right? Yeah.
Mhm. Excessive nodding.
Mm. Yeah. Like I could notice that
I was
myself.
just doing it too.
That
I was like,
nodding. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. That's just such a rich, yeah, thanks for really painting this picture of what's showing up. And obviously there is a lot of, there's a lot of experience, there's a lot of data here. And we'll come back to that when we kind of talk about the classroom agreements in specific. We'll come back to what we just generated. So to just hold on to that. I will put the slides back up for a few moments here. Yeah, and I want to take a few minutes just to talk about a few foundational premises, right? Because I'm obviously, again, we're all standing somewhere. We have a positionality, a lived experience from which we're coming, and so I want to name some of the things that I'm standing on, so that we have a sense, and you have a sense as you're listening to me of like what are the foundational principles and premises. So I'll just do that to set the stage. And one of these is that I certainly see oppression is systemic and that it occurs at these nested levels, right? And obviously, these are not, again, I'm like drawing on so many people's work in saying this, but it's recognizing that systems of oppression are recreated. They play out and they're recreated internally. So these are ways in which we've internalized oppression, right? These are the voices inside our head that keep us within those boxes that society has created and that we encounter everywhere else. But it's not just that we're encountering it outside. We also have kind of the things that we've internalized and the ways in which we say that back to ourselves and keep ourselves like, oh, I can't be this. It's too much, or like that's not my role, or to go back to that example, the way that my grandmother had internalized as a woman what her role was and what she needed to hold, right? And that's something that society told her, but then eventually it became hers also, and then how I've received that. Interpersonally, which is our everyday interactions with others. And as we've just named, that's the things we say, the times we don't say, the silences we hold, our body responses, the things that show up on our faces. So it's all of that, all of those kind of ways in which we interact. It shows up culturally. These are the norms, the stereotypes, the narratives that we're carrying. It shows up politically, or it's held politically, which is our policies and laws. It's about where power is held, right? Who's making our decisions? If we look at decision-making bodies or structures, like who's represented there? Who's making decisions in our government, in our communities, in our institutions? And economically, which is really about how resources are allocated, specifically keeping in mind a history of colonization and imperialism, right? So the current reality, the history and the current reality, so where we're seeing how resources are divided is very intimately tied with that history, right? But essentially in all systems that have been created and are maintained by human beings, we see manifestations of oppression and power dynamics. And these systems are also used to continuously reproduce and maintain oppression. So it's that in itself is also a cycle. So then, if this is kind of a premise I'm working for me, the work of equity is to disrupt these systems and make space for other ways of relating and being, right? It's transforming these systems, and hence transformative equity work that we have. This change has to happen in all of these places in order for there to really be a shift and for us to create more equitable worlds. And the second piece is that I see clear links between trauma and oppression. And if you're interested in diving deeper into kind of our ideas about these, I'll point you to a chapter I co-authored with Sarah Pituello, who's on the call here. Hey, Sarah. And it's published in the Rutledge Handbook for Creative Futures, where we discuss this at a lot of length and kind of dive in. But I was going to just read a short paragraph that maybe will be enough to kind of give a foundation. I'm just going to read because I was like, hey, we did all that work, we wrote it down. I might as well just use that. I think we did a decent job. All right, so I'm just going to read a little piece here, which is about our understanding of power and oppression and how trauma ties into that. So power is a relational divide created when one quality is deemed superior to another. When this divide is perpetuated through cultural, social, political, and economic norms and systems, it coalesces as supremacy, a paradigm that establishes hierarchies of dominance, hierarchies of race, gender, species, sexual orientation, culture, religion, ability, cognitive style, body shape, and more, and their intersectionality. Oppression is the force of this power exerted, both individually and systemically, by the group that's centered as the norm, quote unquote, over another which is marginalized. Oppression can create trauma, and trauma, unless metabolized, creates further trauma. And in the absence of healing, trauma coalesces and manifests as patterns and systems of oppression that further disrupt relationships, perpetuating trauma in generational arcs. Trauma reconfigures constellations of relationships in our inner and outer landscapes in very predictable patterns, making it difficult to be present in relationship. Which means that another way we could say it is that trauma is disrupted relationship, right? It's when we can't be in full relationship, whether that's with other humans because of their different identities, or that's with the outside, the natural world, or with other life. Trauma exists in our physical, psychological, social, and ecological systems everywhere that we are in relationship. So really, because of this connection between trauma and oppression, when we start to do anti-oppression or equity work, when we start to engage with the reality of inequity and how we're both shaped by and participate in these systems, a lot of what's showing up are trauma responses, right? That list we generated earlier: frustration, anxiety, silence, discomfort, urgency. I'm adding in some here as well. Yeah, like a shiftiness of wanting to be somewhere else, discomfort, agitation, right? A lot of what's going on is happening at all of these levels. And that's why, for me, we have to address all these levels of responses: the thought, the felt, and the embodied. Because when we're having equity conversations, when we're having conversations about power dynamics, we're not having just an intellectual conversation, right? And that was very clear when we did that kind of like what shows up. We could identify that all of this is playing out. We're never just talking up here. Yeah, we're having emotional responses. Often these are quite massive. We're having body responses, right? These are quite significant as well. And many years into this work, I can watch this happen in real time, as I can see that all of you who shared are also watching this happen. It's like when someone's eyes start sweeping the room looking for an exit, right? Because you're like, I'm really deeply uncomfortable in this conversation, get me out of here, right? Or when someone turns aggressive and starts verbally attacking the person who's presenting the content, right? This is a fight response. It's like, I'm gonna protect myself, I'm fighting this. Or the silence. Sometimes there's a total silence when you introduce a topic like race into a room, right? And that's kind of a freeze response showing up. So this is all playing out, and it really shapes what conversations are possible, what exploration is possible, and how we can move forward or not. Right? This is all in the room, and it's kind of shaping what's possible in the room. And so this is why I try to consider all these aspects when I'm designing a space in which we're going to have these conversations, and I'm thinking about how am I tending to the thought, how am I tending to the felt, the emotions, and how am I tending to the embodied responses, so that we can stay in these conversations a little bit. What needs to be in place so that we can actually engage, to like stay in that discomfort, in ways that will allow our understanding and our actions to transform and to grow. So one tool that I use, which is what we'll move to next, is classroom agreements, right? And this is a very common practice. I imagine many of you encounter this, many of you use these probably in your classrooms, and there's a lot of theory around it out there. And for me, over the years, I've really been kind of engaging with this theory, as well as watching how these conversations play out in practice, to hone in on which agreements make sense to me to use and why. And of course, I'm sure my understanding will keep evolving. So a couple of years from now, they might be very different ones, but I wanted to share where I am now and kind of the thinking behind it, and where we are. And so we'll also, as we do this, there's a couple that I'll talk through them. And as I said, there's a couple points where I'll invite you into a little practice if you're willing to join us. And then we'll come back and we'll have some time to discuss all of this. Oh yeah, not there yet. Okay, and I hope that people can see these, because I'm realizing that oh yeah, there. You can maybe put the folks up top so you can still see the slides. All right. So yeah, one of the things I realized as I started to really reflect on the classroom agreements is that, oh yeah, each one of these, one of the reasons why they're there is that it's attending to one of those responses that we named earlier in our conversation, right? Or one of the ways in which it makes it hard for us to stay in this conversation or stay in this work. And so the take space, make space. And I sometimes demonstrate this by asking the question. I'll actually do it now. If you want to do the same kind of thing, you can just throw your hand up. Is what's one response or question that you have to things that I've shared so far today? And you can just kind of throw your hand up if you have a thought or a response. Okay. And actually, for now, I'm not going to ask for your response. We will have a chance to talk in a moment, but that was a trick question. I'm not so much interested in your response to that question, but what I'm interested in is if you can just rewind about 30 seconds or 45 seconds to when I asked that question, and to see what happened in your body, to just watch, what was your response in that moment of when I said, here's a question, and you can kind of throw your hand up or respond to it, and to watch what happened. And multiple things might happen. For some of us, there might be like oh yeah, I have something to say. There's an eagerness, right? Sometimes I watch people's like bodies leaning forward. For some of us, there may be like a, whoa, hold on, like a pause, right? For some of us, which we named earlier, there might be the kind of like leaning back of like, whoa. There might be the sense of like, oh, good, we're in a virtual space, so I can just kind of be here quietly, right? And nothing's required. It's not required in the same way as if we were in a physical space. So we might have a lot of these different responses. And of course, there's our own personal tendencies, right? Our personalities that really shape that. But another piece that shapes it is our positionality, right? And what our identities are and what that means for us. And so in the context of having these conversations in a classroom, I'm asking some questions about, like, who feels safe to speak up? Who feels comfortable to speak up in this space? Who is assessing the space to see if it is safe or not, right? What about the slower responses? How can I make space for the slow responses, right? Which might take a little while for people to like pull together the thoughts that are showing up. What about the more complex responses, right? Again, I feel like this came up in your responses in the chat, that like there's often multiple dimensions. These questions are sticky, they're difficult, right? Someone's like, oh, I've been sitting with this for a long time. I wish I had a place I could talk about it, but it might not be a straightforward or an easy answer. And that might take a little while to be like, I have something that feels contradictory or it feels difficult to say, but I want to say it. And so the take space, make space agreement is really about all of this, about watching what's happening in our own bodies. And that when we have something to share, to really step in and take up that space and share it, but also to watch and say, how much space am I taking up, right? What is needed to make space for other people in this room to be able to say what they need to say? And how do I need to show up to make space for others? How do I need to show up to make space for the more complicated, the more sticky responses? So it's watching all of this. And I will talk a little bit more about positionality because that feels very, very fundamental to some of these. And we do, in any kind of room, I do a lot of work around us reflecting on and understanding our own positionality, because that's part of assessing how we're taking up space. And the next one is active listening and presence. And so this is the one where, and David, I'll just flag for you that this is where in a moment we'll go into small rooms, but I'll explain the practice first. And I actually, if Sarah's still here, I know that I've kind of learned this, or we've done this together. So just to give a nod to that as well. But what we're going to do in a moment is we'll split into rooms, and you'll be in pairs. So you'll be with one other person. And the practice we're going to do is called a 50-50 practice. And I'm going to give you a question. I'll put it in the chat as well, so you have it for reference there. But what we'll do is that both people will answer the question, but we'll do it one at a time. And so you'll pick kind of who's speaking first and who's listening first, and then we'll give you a little flag when we're halfway through the time, and you can swap, and then the other person will listen, and the person who was speaking first will listen, and the person who was listening first will speak. But you're going to be asked the question 3 times. And I would actually like the person who's listening to ask the question again. So go through the motions of saying the question again and having the person respond again. And the person who's speaking is going to respond to the question, and you're going to respond with whatever shows up, right? So you may have the same response all 3 times. You may have a totally different response different times. You may have a response that feels contradictory, right? You may have a response that goes into more depth. So there's no right way to do it. It's really just saying, when I'm asked this question again, what's showing up for me? And you're going to respond 3 times to the same question, and then you're going to swap. And for the person who's listening, this is what the 50-50 part is that you're going to listen, you're going to try and keep 50%, you're going to keep half your attention on the listener, on the speaker, so to what they're saying and the content of what they're saying, and you're going to keep half of your attention on yourself, right? And you're going to watch all of those responses that we talked about. What is my mind saying? Like, what am I responding to what they're saying in my mind? How am I, what emotions are showing up in response to what they're saying, and what body responses are showing up in response to what they're saying, right? So you're trying to keep an eye on both of these. It's kind of tricky. Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do. You're going to keep half your attention on yourself and half your attention on the person who's speaking. And also, in service of this paying attention, you're not really going to respond, right? So we're not going to do that excessive nodding or shaking or saying something, or we're just going to listen. Yeah, no worries, Terry. We're just going to listen to what's going on. Yeah, any questions before we jump into this about what we're doing? Any clarifications that would be helpful? Okay. So that is if you want to pop people into rooms, and we'll take 7 minutes about, and so you'll have half of that. You'll have about 3 to 4 minutes on each side, and I'll pop the question into the chat. But the question is, what is one equity issue you're grappling with? Welcome back, everyone. I know it was shorter because, well, it would be nice to have more time for everything, but here we are. Yeah, so thanks for, I think most people are transitioning back, but thank you for taking the time to do that. I think what we'll do is kind of hold the reflections on that until the last. I'll try to just kind of go through the rest of the agreement so that we can save the last 10 minutes for questions and answers. But my hope with our practice is really finding kind of what it takes to show up, like what active listening means, right? Which is like watching all of what's also happening in us, and how that makes room for or doesn't, whether we can really hear the other person, right? And in order to really hear the other person, we have to be aware of what's all happening within me, as part of opening up and listening to other folks. Oh, sorry, I think people are still coming back in. Maybe I started speaking too soon.
I think that's everyone now.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, welcome back. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work through the rest of these agreements, and then we can open up space for questions very shortly. But yeah, and we'll take that time to also talk a little bit about what showed up in your practice. But here's another one: use I statements, avoid generalizations. And for me, this is really about where we talked about like discomfort, dissociation, the feeling of like wanting to separate ourselves, right? It's like, oh yeah, I see this happening, but that I'm not like that, right? Our feeling of wanting to move out of it. And to me, this agreement is really the invitation to come back into relationship with whatever we're talking about, right? And so the way that I use this, and it comes up often, is when people are feeling overwhelmed by something, there is a tendency to start othering, right? It's like, oh, those people do that, or this happens, or that, but it's something that's separate from me. And really the I statement is, can we rephrase that using an I statement? So some prompts I'll offer is, we might say, I heard, da, 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 or research I read said, or growing up I was told, I have seen, I believe X because from these experiences that I've had, I've come to think about it in this way, right? But it's really an invitation to say, can I place myself back in the picture? Where, as I'm watching this, where am I standing? How am I in relationship to the dynamic or issue that's playing out? It also really helps disrupt stereotypes being repeated, right? Which I find is not helpful to the conversation if we're just kind of recreating stereotypes, and also that has a harmful impact on the people towards who that stereotype is about. And shifting this language really helps avoid that, because again, we're often not going to say, I hold this belief about these people, right? It's often like, oh, this, like, those people like that. And then when you can dissociate, you can have that opinion or say that out loud. But when we put ourselves back in the picture, it allows the conversation to slow down, to reflect, and to put ourselves back in the context. I'll try to do this quickly. And actually, I would love if you can just throw yourselves off mute as it comes to it, and speak in as I'm talking. But the kind of story that I tell, because I feel like an embodied version of this is sometimes helpful in helping people understand this agreement, which is assume good intent, attend to impact. But I often ask people, like, okay, you're in this situation, you're in a room, you're moving around, you have like big heavy boots on, and you step on someone's toe and you break their toe. What are you going to do? So if you want to just throw yourself off mute and speak into it, what would you do? You stepped on someone's toe, you have a big boot on, you didn't mean to, but you broke their toe. What do you think you're going to do in that situation?
Sorry.
Apologize.
Sorry. I'm going to apologize.
Yeah, I didn't mean to do that.
You help them, yeah. If they need medical attention, you might take them to the hospital, right? What you're not going to do in that situation is say, hey, I didn't mean to. Are you saying I'm a bad person because I broke your toe? I've been in other rooms and I haven't broken other people's toes, so it must be something about your toe that caused it, right? It's not, right? We don't get, those are not the responses. But when we point out an impact that's happened because of something that we've said, right, whether it's a microaggression or a stereotype or something that's played out, often the response is to focus on our intention. But what this helps us do is really be like, yes, we're assuming that you had good intentions, and we're going to focus on the impact, right? And the reason that this comes up, the reason the focus on the intention happens, I think, and what I've learned is that it's a way to move away from the really uncomfortable equity issue at hand, and it does that very effectively. Focusing on the intention means we're not focusing on the harm and the impact. And so saying we're assuming that you have good intent, right? And it also stops us from falling into that binary of, I'm a good person, I couldn't have done a bad thing, or are you saying I'm a bad person because I'm going to defend that, right? I'm going to fight that. And it's like, we're not falling into that binary. We're really just focusing on what happened, and we're assuming that you're a good person with good intention, so that can be cared for, and we can focus on the issue at hand. All right. Yeah, there's so much more we could go into here. Controversy with civility is the next one. And that's really, Yeah. So it's controversy with civility, address the idea, not the person. This is actually about addressing a silence response, right? To be like, I'm just not going to say anything because I might get into a difficult conversation. And it's saying, let's enter into it. Let's speak in, because silence is also a way in which we protect ourselves and protect the systems and don't get into these conversations. But as long as we're addressing the idea and we're not getting into interpersonal conflicts, it allows us to focus on what's important. So the controversy with civility is really about how do we move beyond silence and stay in these difficult conversations. The choose safety or bravery. And so this is where, and I won't have time to go into this, but I do an embodied practice with people around establishing what our own positionality is. And this is a map of a current course, like students in a current course that I'm teaching on equity, diversity, and social justice. And of course, there's no names there, so there's no kind of identifying information. But it's really looking at what are all, right, looking at all the aspects of my identity. So my class, my caste, my gender, my sexual orientation, my culture, my religion, my racial identity, and placing myself in terms of how much structural power I have. And then in any given conversation, I'm asking myself the question, am I unsafe in this conversation, right? And so in a conversation where, for example, if I'm middle class or I'm English speaking, in a conversation about class or about, how language gives us power in this world, I'm safe, right? Because all the structures around me have my back. And so I might be really uncomfortable in that conversation, but I'm not unsafe in that conversation. And so again, some of the work is around being able to discern our safety from our comfort. And the invitation in this agreement is to say, when you're in a conversation, pause and say, am I unsafe? And if you're unsafe, choose safety, right? Whatever is going to make you more safe. Is that stepping out of the classroom? If that's asking someone to support you, if that's, whatever it takes, in whatever way we can create safety. And a lot of that is up to the facilitator or the educator to try and hold those conditions, right? But if you're uncomfortable, if you're not unsafe, if you're in a conversation about race and you identify as a white person, you're not unsafe in that conversation. So then can you choose bravery, right? Can you choose to be courageous and still show up for a conversation that's uncomfortable? But it's really giving people the tool to say, discern where you stand structurally, what your privilege is in that, what your positionality is in that context, and make the decision based on that, right? Because we don't all show up to all conversations in the same way. So it's really allowing for that discernment. And then the final one, and I'll just wrap up here, I'll leave these up and they'll be, I think if we share the slides out or whatever, they'll be up there, but we really focus on how we care for ourselves and care for each other in these spaces, recognizing, that ultimately all of those responses that show up are very real responses, right? And if we don't tend to them, we can't keep moving forward. Like there is sometimes a tendency to just say like, hey, we'll just push through that. And it's like, no, we actually have to recognize and acknowledge and attend to, and then we can move forward. And so as a group, in this case as a class, but in whatever group I might be working with, we generate like, here's how we can care for ourselves, here's how we can take care of each other, and we agree to these practices so that we are coming into these conversations from really a deep place of care and compassion, which I think ultimately is what's needed, right? It's not about blaming or pinning it on someone, but really recognizing that we can move out of these dynamics and be in more equitable and richer and more vibrant relationships together. So I'll end there. I'll pause there and just kind of open up space for.
Yeah, Chaiti, I feel like so if folks want to ask questions, they can take their microphone off and just ask a question, or you could put in the chat as well, and I can read it out. But I would imagine there's lots of different parts of the presentation that people would want to ask questions about or reflect on. I think that if there was something that came up that you wanted to reflect on with the group, with some of the exercises that we had, that would be wonderful too. I will stop talking.
All welcome. Yeah.
Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Thank you so much for this. It's so wonderful and interesting. In our breakout group, I was with Bassam, and it was really interesting. And I was really doing what you had suggested to do, which was watch myself as well as listening and not try to respond so much, because I'm an an inveterate nodder. And, you know, if I see someone pausing, I'm like, I'm here, I'm listening, like rah, rah. And I tried really hard not to do that. And I found myself getting quite anxious. And so I think that's a really, and I'm just wondering what you would make of that, because I feel like it's a really good response to nod and show encouragement. So I just wonder, you know, in you
why did
telling
we
us
do
the-
that?
Yeah.
So you're not the first person to ask me that question or ask us that question. I know, Sarah, you led this as well, and feel free to chime in. Yeah, really, the intention for that is not as an ongoing practice for us to like be really stoic or like not have any responses, but for the sake of this practice to actually watch how much feedback we give, right? And to become aware of that. So this isn't, for me, is an awareness generating exercise. And the reason I think it's important is that when we do encounter an idea or something that makes us uncomfortable, often we won't give those responses, right? The thing that we're doing without really thinking about it, and then it's like, oh, this uncomfortable thing comes up, and then I'm just like, and you know, there are so many ways in which we communicate a sense of not agreeing or not listening or not, right? And that's likely to happen when someone who doesn't share our positionality is bringing in an idea that's new or challenging or uncomfortable. And so really, it's just about getting better at watching how I'm showing up in those conversations so that I can listen actively, right? And it's, yeah, the ultimate intention is not to be like, show up like a stone wall, because that's not, you know, and that anxiety that you're naming is very real, because it's like, hey, I want to show that I'm engaged. I want to show that I care. I want to show that I'm here. And I'm not in any way suggesting don't do that, but I'm saying that we can practice, you know, we can build a practice outside of those moments to really become aware of, hey, what happens when someone says something that makes me deeply uncomfortable, because it's, you know, which is what happens all the time in equity conversations, right? Because most times these conversations around across positionality are someone pointing out to me what I don't see because I am cisgender, right? It's like, oh, I haven't, or I'm able-bodied. And when a colleague with a disability points something out to me that I have not thought about my whole life, right? It's uncomfortable. And what's going to happen, the ways in which I show up when they name that is really important, right? Am I still showing up with that really enthusiastic, like, oh my gosh, yes, because in that moment, I'm also going, oh my goodness, right? And that shows up in our bodies, that shows up on our faces, that shows up in the things we say or don't say. And so again, yeah, the intention of that exercise is really to do it outside of the spaces where we're having these conversations as a practice for becoming more aware, so that when I really want to show up as an active listener, I even understand what the layers of that are. Does that, yeah. Yeah, you're so welcome. Yeah, thanks for, it's a great question. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for one more. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's also very crucial to note that in some cultures, you know, forms of neutrality are more positive than in other cultures as well. And so again, it goes back to your point about intersectionality as well. I think like what's embodied, that's something that we're taught as well culturally, you know. And so I'll give you an example. I come from a background where if you're not outwardly affectionate, that's considered negative, actually, that you're not showing it. And then having to process that in a different context that's maybe, you know, more informed by European culture, that would be viewed as me infringing upon someone's space as well too. Yeah. So I take note of these things as well, and I find it's very yeah, it's very crucial, I think, just to kind of determine or to learn more about these things, but I don't know how to do it. Like for me, sometimes it just feels inherent that I know these signs, like these codes, because of just the amount of cultures that I've been involved in like throughout my life. But I don't think that's something that, or I wouldn't assume that someone has the same like level of knowledge of that as myself. So I think that's another thing to factor, you know, like in some cases, neutrality is like the best thing ever, you know, and so I'm taking in this exercise as well and thinking about it from a very like subjective lens, like when you apply it here, what does that mean? And when you apply it there, what does that mean too? So it's very complex. Some things aren't just the embodiment isn't purely objective. It's actually very culturally informed. So it's I don't know what you have to say about that, but that's just something I noticed as you were speaking.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for bringing in all those layers, and absolutely, there's so much. I mean, in fact, I would go so far as to say, which is what I was trying to say earlier, we're always all standing somewhere, right? Like there isn't, for me, the question is, I don't think there's a neutral, right? Each one of us are coming from some place. That exercise, the circle of privilege exercise, part of what, to me, what we're trying to get at there is that what you named of saying, hey, I've lived in a lot of different cultures, I've had a lot of different experiences, I see more of this. To me, that's not a coincidence, right? It's like when we're standing further out, when our identities, and I'll use that term, it's like when we're marginalized, right? When you're standing on the outsides of those circles, our field of view is larger. That's by design, and that's true. And so what I was saying earlier, for example, is like, as an able-bodied person, when I move through the world, I don't see things that someone with a disability sees, because by default the system doesn't work for them in the ways that it works for me, and so they have to see it, right? Of course, there's a level of like how personally attuned to that we are, but there's also a structural level. All of us who are in marginalized positions will see more of the thing that we're marginalized by than the person who's standing in the middle. Which is why, to me, understanding positionality is so fundamental to this work, because we need to first name, where am I standing, right? And what a lot of the people who do that exercise are like, oh my gosh, no wonder, like I'm only seeing this part of the picture, right? And somebody else is seeing that part of the picture. And yet often, because of the structures, the decision-making power is in the hands of the people who are dominant in their identities, or who are centered in their reality or their experience, who see less, right? And that's what the work of equity is, like shifting where that power is held and who has a voice. But again, to me, one of the reasons, or not but, and one of the reasons to do this exercise is to develop that capacity. So if you're in a dominant identity, if you're not having to, right? If you're of European heritage, living in a European dominant society and following European norms about what body language looks like, maybe you've never been challenged to think about how that looks different in different cultures. For those of us who've moved between places, we think about it all the time because we have to live with it all the time and we have to navigate it all the time. And so exercises like this, for me, are about developing that capacity, right? It's just pausing down and saying, hey, what am I actually doing? And what does that communicate to someone else? And why does it communicate that? And what in my culture taught me that? And how could that look different in a different context? But we have to first even recognize that that's something we have to pay attention to. And so the embodiment exercises are not so much about attaching a value to it as just starting to observe it and just starting, because when we're not pushed by our positionality to observe that, we have to do it intentionally. We have to commit to it and we have to practice it, right? Whereas for those of us who have to navigate it every day, we don't have the choice. We are also practicing it, but we're practicing it without choice, right? We're practicing it because we have to live within it. I don't know that, yeah.
Thank you. I just conscious of the time and wanted to formally wrap up. And thank you all so much for coming, and to thank Chaiti for the illuminating examples, the practical tools, the reflective practices, and the intentional and thoughtful insights that you've shared in this very short amount of time. I'm certainly wanting to now have an hour to reflect on it and think about how to incorporate some of these practices with such intention. So thank you very much. And thank you all for taking the hour. So yeah.